Like I was saying that, thank you everyone who was running the show, and then Bill literally came and solved this. So thank you, William, Bill, Terry, Anya. Like, everybody is involved in this community. I really appreciate what they're doing. It's a lot of hard work behind the scenes. I've seen them working behind the scenes. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming, because if it wasn't for you to come, there's no talk. All right, DevContainers to the rescue. My name is Emad Alashi. I'm old. I've been working in the industry for the past 22 years. I've done several roles, from developer, team leader, architect. So I've seen a lot, and I have some gray hair. I love the community. It's awesome. If this is your start of the journey, like coming to user groups, please keep coming, because you're gonna see a lot of benefit. And if you want to talk also, there's a lot of people would like to see other new faces, and a lot of people can help. I also had a podcast, and I streamed on Twitch at some point in my life. Both of the audience loved but it was a funny experience. So disclaimer before we start: some photos are AI generated. I'm not responsible for what you're going to see. And we start by a story time. We love stories. Recently, like in the past, in this year and the past year, we have been doing a lot of workshops. And one of the workshops was for GitHub Copilot, taking people in a tour in Stuido Code and show them how they can use GitHub Copilot and get the best out of it. At some point, we thought that we did a good job by setting expectations for the audience, and that they have to have Visual Studio Code, and they have to have Node.js installed, and that they are like fairly comfortable with command lines. Like, it's not too much, but at least the basics. Unfortunately, it seemed that did not work really well, as we had some audiences from various levels, from various backgrounds. Some people really were comfortable, some people were not really comfortable. Some people were not really, like, they're really good developers, but they are really good Python developers. They didn't have Node.js installed. And it was like, not panic time, but there was like, it was not a good situation. So, so people were confused. Maybe, oh, what happened there? Well, maybe not confused as what being tried to portray there. Definitely not people not getting arms out of their heads like the one in the back. But people were not like confused, like we are not ready. And then someone suggested Codespaces, GitHub Codespaces, which is a technology that is built on DevContainers. So it came to the rescue. Who can spot that this is an AI-generated photo? It's definitely not DevContainers. So DevContainers and Codespaces came to the rescue. We managed to direct the audience to the right repository URL, and with their GitHub couple of hours free of Codespaces, they managed to create an environment in the cloud where it's isolated with all the required tools installed and ready for them. So it was something like this. Like, this is a screenshot I took really from my browser, Visual Studio Code in the browser. With the terminal, we can run the code and debug it. Everything was fine. We're not going to talk about Codespaces, though. We're not going to talk about Visual Studio Code in the browser, but we are going to talk about the technology that runs behind the scenes to allow Codespaces to do what it's doing. And at the end of the workshop, everybody was happy. Who can spot how this is an AI-generated photo? The screen is not facing the man. But everybody was like, I'm sure everyone was happy, as happy, and had such a smile. All right, so what really is DevContainers? DevContainers is just a glorified way of running Visual Studio Code in a container. It starts by you have a Visual Studio Code on your local machine with some of the required extensions to do that. You clone the source code or the code repository into your local machine. And then with the DevContainer manifest, Visual Studio Code, along with Docker or any containerizing technology, Podman or whatever, you can, or Visual Studio Code will do the following. We'll create a container from an image that you defined that has all the bells and whistles, but it also runs Visual Studio Code server on that container. So it's creates the container from that image, overrides the entry point, because if the image runs like the CMD starts with npm start, for example, it stops that. It installs Visual Studio Code Server. Visual Studio Code Server is a companion of Visual Studio Code that not a lot of people know about. However, you can run Visual Studio Code in that machine. Like it can run in Docker container. It can run on a remote VM, for example. But in our case, it's going to run in a container. And what it's going to do is that it will have a connection with the Visual Studio Code client that is on your machine. It's going to communicate with some magic ports, and we'll have the code running on that Visual Studio Code server with all the tools required that you have already installed before in that image. What are you going to be able to do to like F5, for example, and this will communicate with the Visual Studio Code server, will run your code, run the debugger, and relay back if you have a breakpoint with the communication. And in Visual Studio Code client, you will see that there is a breakpoint. It's very like nice experience that you might like confuse, like, is this on my machine? Like, how is the debugger working? But it's all happening on the server. Of course, the way also that works, the volume or the source code runs there, so it's like through volume mounts. And you can also do forward ports. So if your code is a web server, you can forward the ports, and you can have a browser that's running, and you can see the web application in your browser on your local machine. Any questions so far? Cool. Yes?
So I see here that the VSCode UI is not looking at source code. When it shows a file on screen, it would ask the VS server for the file.
Correct.
And the VS server will grab it from the source code, which it has.
Yes.
So there's never any communication between the VS Code and the source code.
No. Yeah. But you need to mount the source code as a mount or a volume, and then it's gonna come back to you there because
it's already there.
Yes. Yes.
Like in GitHub .dev.
If with our case here, we mount it, so it's not already there. It mounts it. But in certain situations where the DevContainers is running purely in the cloud, where you cannot really, literally, you cannot mount your machine to the cloud, you'll have to clone the code repository from the cloud, whatever it is, to the cloud machine or the container in the cloud. There's no mount. But in our local development, there's a local mount. More questions? Continue? Awesome. Trust me, there's not a lot of slides, so it's going to be all hands on if things work. All right, so the magic behind the scenes, or the manifest that drives this, is something called the DevContainer JSON file that sits in a specific folder in your code repository, where you can define, for example, the name of your DevContainer you're going to run, the image from which you want, like this is normally an image that you already have built, or an image that already have the SDK or the tools that you want to run with. You get the opportunity to add features. We're going to come talk about the features. This is glorified scripts of installations. You get to do some customizations that you need to have, like a unification between the Visual Studio Code developers. You can also manage the forward ports. You say, like, this is a web application, I need to forward it. And then lastly, there's a couple of commands, or let's say hook points, where you can run scripts in the life cycle of creating that container. All right, so enough talking. Show me the code. Now we're going to start. I'll see how I'm going to do this while talking and typing. All right, so what we have now here, this code I stole from the internet. It's a sample for running Visual Studio Code remote, like a DevContainer in JavaScript on Node.js. So it's a very, very simple app. All what it does is that, sorry? Oh, yes, of course. That's good? Brilliant. All right, so we are saying that this is a simple web server. that runs on port 3000, and it just prints hello world if you run it. I'm going to show you here in the terminal within that I don't have yarn. Yarn is a node just like npm package manager, but it's cool. The cool people like it, but it's not installed in my machine. Command J to hide this. Like I'm gonna try to give you keyboard shortcuts tips while we are doing. I'm gonna also hide with Command B. All right, so I don't have the tools, but I have DevContainer. So if I'm Command B again, you're gonna see here that I have a folder called DevContainer with DevContainer JSON. Command B. All what I said is that this is the Node.js, and the image I'm going to use for my dev environment is the JavaScript node bullseye. Now, if I have the extension that's called DevContainers, this is basically what we need to run, and I'm going to say reopen in container. What's going to be happening behind the scenes, you can see that it reloaded, and now it's running. The shell we are seeing is Visual Studio Code client. We're still on my machine. There's no magic there. But everything else is brought forward from the Visual Studio Code server in the container. To prove you this, I just run. You can see that the path that I'm on is Workspaces, Visual Studio Code Remote Try Node. This is a Linux path. It's not my Mac. And if I run yarn, you'll see that it works. So it's this is magic. All right, let's check what's happening behind the scenes as well. In my Docker, I don't think I can zoom in Docker. Maybe I'll try it. If I'm going to zoom, the operating system is going to fail. So I'm not going to try to do that. But trust me, if I'm going to explain the screen, there's a container that is created based on that image where the entry point is changed. So if I click on the manifest here, you'll see first that we have, not files, sorry, the bind mouse. You can see that in my source, this is on the left is my code in my client. The destination is what's the source or the folder or the directory in the container in which I mounted my source code to. You'll see also that if I inspect, there's several things I wanted to bring your attention to. One of them is the labels. I don't know if the CMD is going to come first or the labels. Why am I doing this one? Okay, we'll look at here. All right, so you can see the mounts, the config, environment variables, CMD. Here you can see that the entry point is changed to just sleep because we want to develop against that container. We don't want to run the image. And also there's a bunch of labels that help you or help Visual Studio Code runner to, this is a container that I created, and it relates it to you to the source code on your machine. So if I, for example, go back to Visual Studio Code and say clean dev containers, I'm not going to leave clean any dev containers, but you can see this list. These are containers previously created. They Visual Studio Code runner or the extension runs Docker with filter on these labels to identify them. All right, now we have a dev container environment variables. Let's say now that I want to add another feature. As a developer, I want to use GitHub CLI. Anyone uses GitHub CLI? Okay, it's a command line tool from GitHub that allows you to interact with the GitHub repository and create pull requests and whatever. Let's say that you like this. Like it's not, well, most of the examples here are not really required, but it's a nice way to show. Dev containers, I can say, for example, features, configure container features. When I hit enter with this, it lists me all like a lot of features that the community have built. The features is just like I said before, it's a glorified installation scripts of Bash that runs on the container. Sometimes I could say like, why would they do this? I can just run an installation command line tool in the container, and that's it. However, some scripts are really complicated, so you come to appreciate having such features there. Some of the scripts also is parameterized, so you can, let's say, for example, GitHub CLI. You have to tick the box because this is an awesome UI. And then you want to configure the options or not. I'm going to say keep the defaults. Once I do this, okay, I thought this is going to happen. I'm going to close this again. Don't save. Open the DevContainers. Do this dance again. GitHub CLI.
Already there.
Okay, yes. What happened behind the scenes is like because I edited that file and then the extension also edited that file, so I didn't see it. So I have to close the file and open it again. So you can see that there's features appearing with the GitHub CLI. You can also manipulate the versions. Now, if we probably have seen a pop-up that I dismissed, I shouldn't have dismissed, but it says like you have changed the div container. This means we probably need to rebuild the image to install these things. I could, if I skip that, I can say rebuild, maybe div containers, rebuild container, and hopefully it will work. You can see here, by the way, if you click here, you'll see a lot of executions like this is like trying to override the entry point and all the like. I'm going to close this. And now, once this finishes, I don't know why it's taking a little bit too long. You can see that it's working. I'm going to try to just create another terminal here and try to use GitHub. And you can see that I have the command line of GitHub, the CLI is installed. The time that you want to do this is when you are trying to separate the base image from, like it's either you don't own the image or you own the image and you keep building it, but you also want to be versatile, giving the chance for others to use the extensions or the installation scripts that they like. All right, now let's say that we want to do some customization. So this is like it's a development environment that's being used by different developers, and we want to agree on certain things. For example, we need certain extensions. So I'm gonna say customizations, and then you can see Visual Studio Code or the GitHub Copilot already suggested to me that you can use these Visual Studio extensions. I'm not gonna listen to these suggestions. I'm going to Command-Shift-K to remove lines together. Let's open OneNote. I like to cheat from my stuff. Where is that extension? Install this one maybe. Oh, I shouldn't have deleted it. Okay, let's do this. Or maybe we can search for extensions, search for this person. And if I click on install, it's going to install it on locally and on my remote, also sorry, locally and container remote. But just to make things simpler, I will allow it to install these. So I'm going to grab this one. Also remove this again. Don't be phased out by these hiccups. So this is a spell checker extension that I don't have, or maybe I have, but it's good. And also, my friend, the JavaScript code snippet. I'm going to add this one as well. I'm going to save. You can see that at the bottom, it says you want to rebuild. I'm going to say yes. So what happens behind the scenes is that the container will be rebuilt again, but also it will add these extensions. Now, these extensions will be added to the Visual Studio Code server on the container. Some extensions will run on both. You have to, in the extensions tab, you can say, I want it to be on both. Some extensions are only client, like the themes. You can't really run a theme on the remote container. And some can be installed on the remote only. So if you go back to the extensions now, you'll see that this is installed as an extension, but it also says I can also install locally because this is locally or like on the machine, but it's only now installed in the remote container. Any questions so far? All's good? Awesome. All right. So we have defined our extensions. We added some features, and then we say, all right, let's let's also change the settings of the Visual Studio Code editor. So in my case, I want to render all the white spaces and the tabs. So I clicked save. It's going to say rebuild. And hopefully, these settings will apply, and we will see the result. You can see here now that we can see the tabs and spaces rendered in Visual Studio Code. Now, I want to just do one thing before we continue. If I say reopen locally, so I don't want to keep this code repository running on the container, remote container. I want to open it locally. You'll see that I'll get back my theme before. If you are wondering about this theme, like the color, like how I did, there's an extension for that that's going to surprise you by just to distinguish between your Visual Studio Code. And you can see that I also don't have the white spaces. Nonetheless, let's continue. I'm going to reopen it back in the container. Now, we are in here. All right, so now let's start overriding some of the features that is part of the container with the Visual Studio Code. One of the things is that when you have the container running and you have Visual Studio Code server running where your code is being debugged and running, you will have two users under which things are running. First is the container user, where once you create the container, everything that is running the root on the basic level is running under a user. But you'll also have a different user to run Visual Studio Code server itself with all the terminals there and the processes that are spun out of Visual Studio Code. This distinction will allow you to have more granular permissions between the base image and the Visual Studio Code where it's running. But before that, before we show you how this is different for user users, I'm going to debug, actually. We haven't tried this, and I skipped this. So I have the package.json. Your command P, by the way, is your friend. You can navigate to the files, and then you can execute commands. You don't have to use your mouse at all. So I'm going to debug, and you're going to see that Visual Studio Code said, OK, I've noticed that because your ports in your image are like 3,000, you have some ports exposed. Do you want to also forward the ports from your local machine, or the opposite, from the remote container to your machine? Say yes, and it suggests to open the browser. Open it in the browser. The browser is running, but who can guess why it's not showing? Sorry?
You got a breakpoint or something?
Yes. It's just to interact with you guys, that's all. So there's a breakpoint. So this is to show you that you can actually debug and run just as any normal environment. So I'm gonna continue this one, and you can see in my browser that it's saying hello remote world. All right, back to our user talk. So I'm gonna say, for example, in the container user, I want the container to run as nobody user. Nobody is, I think it's in most of the Linux. I don't know, but it exists in this image. So I'm just going to use it. But before I do that, I'll go here and open my container to show you. And I'm going to execute. Execute now. I'm having a shell with the container out of Visual Studio Code. So if I say, who am I? You can see that the container is running under the user root. So what I'm going to do, I want the container to run under the user nobody. So I'm going to save this. It's going to say rebuild, yes, and give it a couple of seconds. It's died. You can see that it died here, and then it came back again with different name because it's recreating the container every time. And this time, if we go to the execute and say who am I, you'll see that it's nobody. If you want to do any customizations on how the container is running, you can do that. I don't want to, there's also there's another property. It's called remote user. You can also change the user under which the Visual Studio Code is running with the terminal and the like. But I'm not going to do this because this project specifically wants the Visual Studio Code user. If I run it under a different user, it's going to crash. So I'm not going to do that. All right, let's now talk about the environment variables that I can use. So I can say also in the container environment, I want to have different environment variables. Let's say I'm going to have Melbourne, or I can say city, and say Melbourne. I'm going to save and rebuild. If I go to my container here, I'm going to show you, because if I print environment variables here with this command, print environment variables, you can see that there's city Melbourne because this is on the container level. If I also do it here, control tilde, say print environment variables, you'll also see a lot of more environment variables, but I can also grep and say only show the ones that's called city, and you can see that it's also city Melbourne. Now, if I want to create an environment variable specific to the Visual Studio Code process, and I can say, all right, oh, not here. I want to override also or change the remote environment variables. And rather than say city, I'm going to say city2 because it's going to be a problem if I write on the same one. I'm going to say Sydney. Anyone from Sydney? Okay. So I'm going to save, rebuild again. And this time, of course, in your environment, you're not going to do this. You're not going to be rebuilding the container all the time, even though that it should be healthy. Like you should not put anything in your container that you might lose. You mount your volumes, and this is how you can maintain any changes. But like you only change the DevContainers files until you reach a certain maturity, but then it becomes stable for a while for your developers. So I'm going to open this again and execute print environment, and you can see that there's only let's do this again, print environment and grep city. There's only the environment variable city that was because the remote environment variable we created for the other one was only under the Visual Studio Code. So if I print environment here and grep city, you'll see that there's two: the container environment variables and the environment variables we defined for the Visual Studio Code processes. All right, so we created the image. We had Visual Studio Code extensions added. We had changed the settings of Visual Studio Code. We can manipulate the users. We can change environment variables. But we can also now, because behind the scenes it's all containers, and like we have the some sort of like Docker run, we can also pass parameters to running the Docker container. So because there's a lot of options. So what we can say, we can do run args, and anything that you can pass for a Docker run command, you can pass here. In my case, I'm going to be fancy, try to be fancy, and add host. I'm going to say, for example, I want google.com to go to, okay. So what this does behind the scenes, it's, you know, if you are familiar with the H3 hosts where you can manipulate with the IP addresses of the local, you go to your browser and put a name, and then it goes to IP address here that you want to specify. This writes to the hosts file in the container. So if I save this, I'm going to rebuild. This I found this very interesting in some of the cases where I want to run processes within container, and then I want to talk to my local machine. So if I cat etc. hosts, you'll see that one of the entries below, the one before the last, is that google.com is actually pointing to that IP address.
I have a question on the environments. Does it support like .env files or secret files that you can run?
You bet. Yes. You can. There's different ways you can do this. You can pass in the run args. You can pass an environment variable and select say environments, and you can pass the name of the environment variables. It's going to be file. I don't recommend passing secrets because it's probably going to be written all the way. It's going to be in your code repository. So I think it's not to be a good idea. But I don't think it's a good idea to keep secrets in the code repository in all cases. But like if you can define if you can define an empty environment variables, and you can tell your developers, like, if you want to run the container, you can override this file with your basic one, and you can ignore that environment file in your code repository. This will take you so far. But secrets as a first-class citizen in the DevContainers, I don't think there's space there. All right. So now that we have all these run args and stuff, now we can look at the life cycle of the container. DevContainers, they allow you to jump into the lifecycle when you're creating the container, or post-create the container, or after create the container, where you can run certain scripts. We're going to look at two only because of time, and there's some quirkiness in some of the scripts, so you have to read the documentation really good, not just rely on your instincts of reading the name and say, oh, it's post-create or not. All right, so in this one, I'm going to look at the initialize command. The initialize command runs on your host machine. So it's where, like, if you are doing DevContainers on your local machine, this is running on your Mac, for example, not in the container. If you are doing this in the cloud as like Codespaces, it's running on the machine that's running that container. So just bear in mind. So in order for us to show this, we can say, okay, echo, and I can say echo hello world, and we can say, and who am I? Will this work? I can't remember if it works. Rebuild. I'm going to also open the logs while it's doing so. Oh, did you see that? So you can see hello world, and it's actually that when we said who am I, it's running the user. So this allows you to do various stuff, like if you want to create a Docker network that is required for Docker images working together, or you want like anything that you need to prepare for Stuido Code running there. All right, we can also, Command J, we can also do something about post create command. This is a script that's going to run in the container after the container is created. There's other script entries that we can look at, but maybe after after the session finishes. But there's entry points that you can jump into. We're going to look at the post create command. So I'm going to do exactly the same. Hello world from container, and I'm going to save this and rebuild. And it's going to take some time because it's running in the container. If everything's correct, maybe I should look in the. Did it? Can you see it? Yeah. Hello world from container node. This one. All right. So this is a lot. Like with this, you can do a lot of things. Like the environment is beautiful. What you can do is also, I'm not going to show it here, but I'll show it as part of another example. You can, instead of defining an image, you can say, I have my own Docker file, and I want to rebuild it every time. This is not too common because you want to build on a basic image that everybody has access to, but you can still do that. It becomes really good in the next example. So I'm going to stop this, reopen this locally, just to kill that container. And I'm going to switch with Command tilde to this and zoom in. All right. Oh, anyone uses Copilot? All the time. Like, I'm addicted to this thing, but I don't trust it. Like, I still have trust issues with it. All right. So in our case, in this one, I'm gonna. This is an example also from the internet. I'm sorry, I haven't. I promised myself, like, I wanted to have a reference to all these code repositories because they already exist. I didn't create them, but I created some of the DevContainers for them. Afterwards, I'll make sure that you get these links so you can have something to start from. This is a compose example where the solution has 3 services in a Docker compose. So there is service number 1. I'm going to zoom in one more time. Service number 1 is the front end. You can see that it's providing a context for a build. This is a folder in the solution. So let's maybe do this. There's a front end folder. There's a back end folder. And there is that's all. So you have the front end service. You want to expose it on port 3000, and you want to mount your Docker Compose container on that part of your source code. And you can see that the networking is just a React Express. This is a name of the network that you want to connect the containers with. It's not too important in our case, but if you're curious, we can talk about this afterwards. And this container depends on the backend. The backend is also have a context of the backend. When it builds, when you want to run and build, the same thing also, some volume mounts for the source code, and then depends on the third service, which is a MongoDB. MongoDB, and also this one is exposed through port 3000. MongoDB is just a MongoDB that is based on an image, is not based on a Docker file, and it just hosts your data. So if I go right now and go to the root and say Docker compose up, it's going to have one container for the front end, one container for the back end, and one container for the MongoDB. They are all talking based on this networking together. All right, let's have a look at the Docker file of the front end. It's not too much. It's just we are normally building a Node.js, and we are doing install. I think it's a React. You can see that the command is npm start for the Docker file. And the Docker file for the backend is also the same. You can say npm run dev towards the end. What we are going to do, with DevContainers, we're going to hijack that part and say, oh, don't run npm start, because we are going to use this for development. So this is the solution that came as is. I want to have a DevContainer environment for the backend. So what I did is I also invoked the DevContainers, Command-Shift-P, and I said DevContainers, and I said add DevContainer configuration files. I'm going to be very careful. I hope I'm not going to ruin this for myself, but I'm not going to go all through the way. If I say, yes, add configuration, it's going to ask me, do you want to add it to the workspace or to the user that's running Visual Studio Code? I'm going to say just for the workspace. And then it's going to say from predefined container configuration template, or from, it's going to look at the compose files, Docker compose files in our solution. Once it finds one, it's like, do you want to run this based on that compose file? And say yes. Last thing, it's going to say, what container are you trying to build a dev environment for? Is it the front end? Is the back end? Is it MongoDB? I chose back end. And then what I got here is I got a dev container that has a name. And there's a lot of the comments that guides you. It's really good from the team who built DevContainers, really nice. You can hear in the DevContainer say, all right, this time I'm building this from a compose, Docker compose. However, you can see that there is two compose files. There's the compose file that is originally part of the solution, and there is the Docker compose file that is created by the DevContainer extension. We're going to have a look at this in a minute. And in the DevContainer manifest, we can also specify that I'm building this dev environment for the backend. I want the workspace folder to be the user source app. This is like how it's going to be connected to the in the backend. And I also want to forward the ports, the 3000 of the backend, and the ones in the front end. Because we are creating this for the back end, I also want to expose the front end 3000. If I don't put the line 27, the only 3 ports going to be exposed is the back end 3000, and we're not going to be able to navigate to the front end to run the application. We can just hit the API directly with port 3000. I want to expose both, so I can go to the front end to show you how the back end is invoked. And the rest, everything else is like what we talked about before, applies here. Let's have a look at the compose file that they created for me. So Docker compose. Here, you can see that if you're not familiar with Docker compose extension, you can have two Docker compose files, one that is having all the basic configurations for Docker compose, and then another one to override some of these configurations that you had before. This and when you say Docker compose or Docker compose up and supplies these files together, it builds them on top of each other. This is very nice for like if you are building dev environments, you can have the basic one for production, and on top of it, you have a certain one for development. So in this case, in the extension, we're saying, okay, keep everything exactly the same from the original Docker compose, except for the services backend. I want to, like if you want to, you can override the context and the Docker file. If you want to have another Docker file that's specific for the development environment, I'm not going to do this in our case. And the volumes, you want to have the workspaces tied to the dot folder, and sleep infinity, because we don't want to run the npm start. So if now that everything is set up like here, I'm going to say reopen. We are ready now. We have the Docker Compose, we have the DevContainer, we have everything set up. If I reopen in a container, it's going to build the 3 containers, and it's going to override the entry of the backend container. It's going to install Visual Studio Code server on the backend container, and it should be ready for me to inspect. Now, because we overridden, or because we forwarded 2 ports in the DevContainer configuration, I'm hoping that if I say Command J and show the lower pane, if I click on ports, you'll see 2 ports. One, the 3000 for the back end that was unspecified, and one for the front end 3000. And this, because these ports are true for the containers relatively, 3000 in the back end and 3000 for the front end. But when they are exposed to the host, of course, they're going to go to a different, like Visual Studio say, like, okay, 3000 is already taken. I'm going to assume you're going to be 3001. And most likely you say yes. I think there's a way to force it, but we don't have to. So if I click on this, oh, I had to press Command. So you can see now it's the front end is running. I can't remember which breakpoint I put there on to-dos. Okay, so I'm going to say Melbourne.net is awesome. Add to-do. Did it hit my breakpoint? No. Oh, of course. Can anyone guess? I have a lot. I have lollies for like anyone who can guess as a lolly. Yes, man, you're awesome. I'm not debugging. So we are overridden the entry point with this, like we said, don't run the Docker image, correct? Now there's nothing running, and the front end is trying to reach the back end, and there's no back end. So what we will do is we go to the package, Command P, without Command Shift P, package.json. We're gonna run the debug. We're gonna start. Of course, you can have also launch JSON in each subfolder. And and something that we want to bring your attention to is that you can see here that only the back end is loaded, not the whole solution, not the front end. You can't see the front end. You can't see the DevContainer file. So now I say, let's hope it works, and add to do. And you can see that the breakpoint is hit. And you can run your debugging, whatever you like, and then finished. All right, this is more than what I wanted to show today. I don't have a slide that says thank you and everything, but I thank you. You have been a great audience. If you have any questions,